What's offered as a choice becomes force-fed. Look at verse 8 with me. Daniel purposed in his heart. The first thing, if you didn't catch that, there's this kind of force to try to force on you an identity. Verse 8 now. Second thing to say is, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. So we all know how the story's going, right? They present him with a scholarship. You get food, you get education. That's how it's supposed to go, right? Now you can come in and you can have the food. And we only know of 4 out of all of Judah. We only know of 4 that are going to stand strong in this. They're offered a portion of the king's delicacies. You think there were some pork chops in the king's delicacies? Bet there were. You think there were some animals that were sacrificed to a coup? I bet there were. How hard would that be to know they just had a sacrifice to a coup outside, and now all the young people who are in the school are getting fed? What do you think that would have been like for Shadrach? Ooh. You can see why they would say we don't want to defile ourselves with this. And so he says they make a request. That's what happens. It's a request to the chief priest of the eunuchs, to the chief of the eunuchs, that he might not defile himself. And now God had brought Daniel into favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king. Pause. Did you just see that? We just went from benevolence. Oh, the benevolent king who's brought everyone in and going to give them education and food. But now what does the eunuch say? I don't know if the request was simple. I just don't want to eat those things. And what did the king have to say? Or what did the eunuch have to say? Oh, I'm worried. That puts my head on the chopping block. He says, I fear my lord the king who has appointed your food and drink. For why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? And then you would endanger my head before the king. Oh, Mr. Benevolent King doesn't look so benevolent anymore, does he? Because listen, you better hear this. That offer for food was not an offer like you can take it or leave it. It's a force feeding. You will eat it. And not just anybody could come up and make this request. It took Daniel being in favor that God had done this, that Daniel was in the favor with the chief of the eunuchs, that he could even request it. I hope you better hear this, Pastor. The society around us, the world around you is presenting that you have a choice. As a matter of fact, you might even hear those words sometimes, that you should have a choice. But don't you understand? It is not a choice. It's a force feeding. No, I know some of the younger generation doesn't like it when I use these words, but you do realize that that's what happens in communist countries, right? What's a woman's choice here is you're not allowed to have that many children there. Am I telling the truth? Would you want to be in a society that says, oh, well, you have too many children, and if you don't have millions of dollars to pay us in taxes to have another child, well, then you're going to have to abort that child. But here, don't you understand, it starts as, but you have a choice. Friends, what is a choice today is forced tomorrow. It is a forced feeding that you have to participate in the thing that they want us to participate in. Most of you all know that I've got a YouTube channel, and that's been growing pretty substantially. Those social media accounts have been growing pretty substantially, and I ended up on a phone call with Meta, a phone call with a person from Meta about that growing account and things they wanted and trying to protect that or whatever, different things I had to sign up for. And so most of those were all good, but they said, hey, we've got this video series that you could do, and we want you to do it. This is like on a phone call. We want you to do this video series. It'll help out with your reach, how far you can reach. Okay, sure. Yeah, I'll look into it. And so they sent me the little video series, the link for the video series. And the moment that I clicked on it, here was a guy having a live stream, and there was a man putting makeup on his face. I just turned it off. I'm not watching that. But you better hear me. You better pay attention to what I'm saying. What's offered as a choice becomes force-fed. You want to hear some truth? Don't worry, there's nobody on the roof. It's not reindeer or anything. It's just heat. I saw a bunch of heads like looking up. But hey, stick with me for a second. What starts as a choice becomes force-fed. How many things are you being force-fed? You just try to watch a clean movie. Can you find one? Nope. You better go back to like the 1950s, and even that, I better get Pure Flix, because they're gonna mix it into everything. You know what my brother and I say to each other sometimes when we hear something like that? We'll say, you're gonna look at it and you're gonna like it, because that's exactly what they do. What looked like was a choice in the matter was now force-fed to our children in our school systems. What looked like we were going to present love and kindness and acceptance. Well, it's not love and kindness and acceptance. It's you're going to accept this. This is the thing that you're going to accept. I'll give you an example of that. Anybody remember what happened with Chick-fil-A years ago when they made one simple statement? They said that we stand for traditional marriage. Anybody remember that? Do you remember what happened? They went on traditional marriage. They said, we stand for traditional marriage. The LGBTQ community went nuts on them. They went and had kiss-ins. All the churches rallied up and ordered Chick-fil-A that night. It was on a Wednesday night. We did it. We ordered Chick-fil-A. Everybody ordered Chick-fil-A for their churches and had it brought in. Chick-fil-A had record-breaking numbers that year. But does anybody remember when the college campuses were refusing to let Chick-fil-A in and they were kicking the Chick-fil-A's out because they had simply said we stand for traditional marriage? Isn't it interesting what starts as a choice today is force-fed tomorrow? Don't let it be fooled. Don't be fooled into thinking I can just accept this culture. What happens in our minds is, I can just I'll just be Switzerland. I don't have to make a decision. I don't have to say anything about it. I don't have to do anything about it. Well, friends, you better hear this. What you accept today by doing nothing will be forced down your throat later. Who else would ever get to say no to this? Daniel and them come and say they don't want to do it. They don't want to eat. I don't know if that clap was good or, hey, you should wrap it up. But look at what happens. They say to test them, and we saw this last week. They were tested, and they turn out better than all the others. And in verse 17, as for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature, wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. And at the end of the days, when the king had said that he should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar, and the king interviewed them. Did you just see that? Hold on. Who did the interview, the exit interview? It's been 3 years. They've gone through their literature and knowledge training, their language training. 3 years later, they get into the they get into the palace. They get in for their exam. And who's doing the examination? Who's doing the exit interview? The king. Nebuchadnezzar himself is saying, sit down, and he's going to examine each and every one of them. Hey, I got another one for you. You better hear this. Y'all, what they're checking for right now, what you're being cultured to, is imitation. The presentation is, we're going to educate your children, we're going to help the culture, but really what we're seeing is, can we cause everyone to do the thing that we want them to do? And the king is the one who says to interview them. Notice they're not measured against the others in the group. They're not measured against others in the country. They're measured against what the king wants. Do we not see a similar thing even in our school systems today when we look at CRT? Y'all do know what I'm saying when I say CRT. Do you know that we see a similar thing, right? When did accreditation in our schools have to do with critical race theory? You see, the idea is we're facing this right now with our school. We're facing people who are saying, well, what about accreditation? First of all, you need to understand something. You can't even get accredited in the first year. You got to be established for a little bit. So y'all need to take a deep breath. We're all right. We're not a bunch of dummies. We're working through this. And you do realize that a whole lot of those accreditations that schools have, they have nothing to do with education. They have nothing to do with math or science, at least not in that way. You realize that all of those are agenda-based. Are you doing the thing that the government is telling you to do? Did you get to the point that the government wanted you to be by the end of your knowledge? Did you get that? Oh boy, he's just telling it really like it is today. Look at this. Then the king interviewed them, and among them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And therefore they served before the king, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and the astrologers who were in his realm, who were in all his realm. And thus Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. Notice in the beginning of our text today that their names are being changed to try to take God out. Can I just turn you real quick? Can I turn you in the Bible to something? Will you turn over to Daniel? You'll stay in Daniel with me, but turn over to Daniel chapter 4 and verse 8. King Nebuchadnezzar tries to change their names, and in Daniel chapter 4 and verse 8, look at what happens. In Daniel chapter 4 and verse 8. You got it? Yes. But at last Daniel came before me. Look at what he says. This is the king speaking. But at last Daniel came before me. His name is Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God. In him is the Spirit of the holy God. And I told the dream before him, saying, even Nebuchadnezzar has to use the name Daniel and acknowledges the fact that he's not using his name Belteshazzar. That was the name that the king gave him according to his God. But when Daniel could interpret the dream, what did he call him? Daniel, not Belteshazzar. Look at chapter 5 and verse 12. We see the same thing with the next king in line. Did you see how this whole story ended today? That he lasted until King Cyrus? Nebuchadnezzar comes and goes. Darius is going to come and go. Then Cyrus is going to be on the throne. There's multiple kings. Look at the next king that happens in Daniel chapter 5 and verse 12. Inasmuch as an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, interpreting dreams, solving riddles, and explaining enigmas were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. And now let Daniel be called, and he will give the interpretation. Do you notice it again? They tried to change his name, but they couldn't change his name when he stood against it. Look at this with me. Look at Daniel chapter 4 and verse 34 with me. The king stands thinking he's going to be the one to examine them. And in the end of the chapter, what do you see? Is Nebuchadnezzar, he does the exit interview, and he finds that they're better than all the magicians in all of his realm. Well, you want to see what happens with Nebuchadnezzar? Here's a little preview of what happens. Turn back to chapter 4 and verse 34. In chapter 4 and verse 34, and look at this. And at the end of the time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever. King Nebuchadnezzar had to admit that God was the only God that's ever on the throne. You want to know what happened with Darius? Look over at chapter 6. We just read about Darius in chapter 5. Look at chapter 6 and verse 25. If you don't have it, just look up at the screen. Daniel 6 and verse 25. Then King Darius wrote to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure until the end. Are you catching on to this? They can try all they want. They can stand up and say they have the power. They're the ones that can change your identity. They can. Friends, you better hear this. Every bit of that is thwarted with this. Are you ready? Resist the devil and he'll flee from you. And I want to show you this last thing. Turn to one more passage with me and we'll close it out right here. It's Philippians chapter 2 and verse 9. Look over at Philippians chapter 2 and verse 9 with me. Philippians chapter 2 and verse 9. Therefore God has also highly exalted him and given him the name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, of those in heaven and those on earth and those under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Amen. Notice Nebuchadnezzar comes and goes. Darius comes and goes. All the way till we get to the end of the chapter. And you know who's at the end of the chapter? Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. You know, the idea would be, when we read things like this, like we're going to stand strong and then we're going to see deliverance. Do you understand that the timing of that would have to be about 70 years? Daniel was taken when he was 15 years old. Say he was 15, maybe he was 16, whatever, but let's say 15. Do you realize that at this point that we just read through basically the whole history of Daniel? When we get to that verse 21, Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. King Cyrus is the king that's going to let Judah go back. 70 years later, Daniel's now 85 years old. You know what you don't read about in Daniel? You're not going to read about his wife. You don't read about his deliverance from Babylon. He never got out of Babylon. He stayed there the whole time. And yet the whole time that he was there, he was never defiled. He didn't defile himself. He didn't eat the king's meat. He didn't drink the king's wine. He didn't eat things that had been sacrificed to idols. He didn't eat those things that were unkosher for the Jewish community. He didn't let his name be changed. They might have tried to change it, but he wouldn't let it happen. I'm going to give you this last thing as we close the day. Everybody stand up on your feet with me, and here's what I'm going to tell you right now. What Daniel demonstrates for us is a life lived in the middle of Babylon. And that's the very same thing that you and I can have right now. Friends, I can't pull you out. I can't pull you out of the world, and I can't pull you out all the troubles that are here, but I can tell you this. There is a name that is above every name, and it's the name that will last. And that name's not Belteshazzar. No, that name's Elohim. That name is Yahweh. And if you put your faith in him, no matter what situation you're in, even if you're all the way in captivity, we'll read soon enough as Daniel will be thrown in a lion's den. We'll read soon enough as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I'm using their given names, they're going to be thrown into a fiery furnace. And yet never do we see that they ever get out of Babylon. Friends, I'm going to just tell you this morning. If you want God to be with you in the middle of the fire, if you want him to be with you in the middle of the lion's den, then you've got to stand against that changing of the culture, that changing of your identity, even right now. You can't allow the enemy to change your identity and make you think that you're something that you're not. Will you give yourself to him even right now? Will you place yourself right inside of him? His invitation is to you. You can come and be he's got his name mixed up in Daniel. He's got his name mixed up in Hananiah. You realize he'll do the same for you in your life right now. Would you be willing to step out of your seat? Who cares what time it is? Why don't you step out of your seat right now? Make a decision to follow the Lord. I'm going to pray.